Hi, this is part 2 of our lecture on Romanesque art and architecture. So we had started to talk about the explosion of church construction during this period. We started talking about the floor plan of the Romanesque church, how they experimented and progressed on the early Christian basilica and made some changes and adapted the basilica even more in terms of a Romanesque floor plan. Remember, Romanesque architecture is really the idea of Romanesque, and the name Romanesque is where builders and architects are borrowing elements from Roman architecture, such as rounded arches and columns. And so that's where we get the term Romanesque for the art and architecture of this period. So one of the things that they experimented with, again, was replacing the timber-roofed structure, which was prone to fires, and started experimenting with stone vaulting, ribbing, experimenting with barrel and groin vaults, piers, and using stone. I mean, they were still using a traditional post and lintel way to span space, but they were also making interesting progression with, using stone and creating certain supports that would support the weight of stone. So one of the things that we see with the Romanesque period is a return to monumental stone sculpture, in particular with the decorative program of church portals. So I showed you this image earlier, and so this is a church portal. This is an entryway into the church. Remember, these are sort of markers between entering from the regular world into a sacred world. And this is the part that we're really going to be focusing on, the tympanum, T, and it's spelled right there for you. And this is where a lot of relief decorative sculpture was used in terms of the exterior decorative program of these churches. It wouldn't hurt you to know some of this vocabulary. We're really going to be focusing on the tympanum. Sometimes they would also include sculpture in these columns and the jamb columns as well. There might be some relief sculpture in this middle part called a trume. But for our purposes right now, we're really focusing on the tympanum. So make sure you know that term. So here's an example. This is an example from the church at Conques in France, at St. Foy. When pilgrims arrived at Conques, they would probably head for the church to receive blessings. That would probably be the first thing they do. Yet before they got inside, an important message awaited them on the portals. So this is a scene from the Last Judgment. And so this is very typical of this period, these sort of Last Judgment scenes, fire and brimstone, and really trying to scare the worshiper into being, good and being a good Christian, because otherwise they would go to hell. And this is what this scene is depicting. You have the middle figure of Christ, and then, he's in judgment. And again, this is a good... Also worth noting the change in the depiction of the Christ figure. Remember, with early Christian art, he was the good shepherd, he was a beardless younger man. Now he sort of progressed into more of this kind of ominous judging figure. So again, these scenes were depicted on the tympanum, and this is that central semicircular space, and again adorned with a relief carving above the central portal entrance. And then if you need to reference, here's the smaller diagram. So again, you can sort of relate the architectural features. So this is a close-up. Apocalyptic themes were very popular during this period. In the center sits Christ, and again we talked about how he's changed. Instead of this kind of good shepherd figure, he's more of a judge, and he means business. He sits enthroned with his right hand pointing upwards to the saved, while his left hand gestures down to the damned. This scene would have served as a reminder to those entering the church of St. Foy about the joys of heaven and torments of hell. Immediately, on Christ's right are Mary and Peter. And Peter, Mary and Peter, and possibly the founder of the monastery, as well as an entourage of other saints. And so this was very typical, this sort of subject matter on these Romanesque tympanums of these portals, the Last Judgment scene. We'll kind of look at some of the relief carving up close. So again, note the large judgmental figure of Christ. There's also a use of hierarchic scale where he is centered, he's larger, he's emphasized by this orb behind him. And again, he really fits in with this Romanesque style and characteristics that we talked about earlier, where we described Romanesque art as being very compartmentalized, very frontal, very central. Again, very anti-classical. And I think you can definitely sort of pick that up when you look at this. Definitely the figures are not anatomically correct. And again, that wasn't the purpose. This was expressing a concept, an idea. They weren't concerned about imitating nature and capturing reality. They were trying to express an idea. The figures are very stylized, and again, these are elements that are reminiscent to early Byzantine art. So you might want to go back and sort of compare some of the images. I think in one of your Byzantine PowerPoints, it wasn't one of your 250 works, but it was a depiction of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. He had sheep around him. It was a really beautiful mosaic. And maybe, sort of compare and contrast the stylistic conventions of those two periods. Below, there are saints that are depicted. There's a small arcade, and it's covered by a pediment that they're standing in. This is meant to represent the house of paradise. These are blessed worshipers, those that have been saved and by Christ and who will remain in paradise with him for eternity. So these are the good souls. These are the people who will spend their eternity in heaven. At the center, we find Abraham, and above him, notice there's an outstretched hand of God right here. So I think this is meant to be Abraham right here. And then we have this outstretched hand of God. Again, this is a lot of Christian iconography that will continue to pop up with religious-themed art, Christian art. So this outstretched hand of God is beckoning a kneeling saint, a saint of faith right here. Or this probably is Saint Foy or Saint Faith. Okay, we're going to look at the hell side, the scary side. On the other side of the pediment, a row of angels opens the graves of the dead. As the dead rise from their tombs, their souls will be weighed, and they will be admitted to heaven or hell. And so this is sort of what's happening. This process is taking place in this scene. The scene that we see right under Christ's feet, so here are his feet, and this is what we're looking at. You can see the clear division between a large doorway leading to paradise and a terrifying mouth that leads the way to hell. So here's the mouth, the hell mouth, which is another sort of Christian icon. And then here's this nice decorative door that leads to heaven. And so here you see sort of the difference between the good souls and what's happening over here with the bad souls. They're pretty freaked out. So we're going to look at some more. And one of the things that I find interesting is that when you have these sort of compositions, these apocalyptic scenes like the Last Judgment, where you have heaven and hell, I think for an artist, compositionally, the hell part would be more interesting to carve. And, because there's a lot more movement and energy compared to the heaven side, which is obviously more calm and stable. So from an artistic point of view, I think it probably would have been more fun and more challenging to be sculpting the hell side of these Last Judgment scenes. So inside hell, things obviously aren't looking very good. It's very chaotic, very disorderly. Notice how different it looks from the right-hand side of the tympanum. Again, very calm, very stable. There's also a small pediment in the lower register of hell, where the devil, just opposite to Abraham, reigns over his terrifying kingdom. So this is the part that we're talking about right now. The devil, like Christ, is also enthroned. He's an enthroned judging figure, determining the punishments that await the damned according to the severity of their sins. In particular, to the devil's left is a hanged man, right there, poor guy. The man is a reference to Judas, who hanged himself after betraying Christ. Just above Judas is a knight. A knight is tossed into the fires of hell, and above him a gluttonous man is hung by his legs for his sin. Each of these sinners represents a type of sin to avoid. So again, this is very educational. This is educating Christian worshipers, these pilgrims who are entering into this church, what they should be striving towards, and what they should be contemplating during their spiritual worship inside the church. So there are scenes such as adultery, arrogance, misuse of church office. And so these portals were not just a warning for pilgrims, but also for the clergy who lived in the Conques, the Church of St. Foy at Conques as well. So it was meant to instruct and sort of be a didactic, teaching, moral sort of lesson, and for worshipers to contemplate, or Christians in general to contemplate. All right, so we are going to look at a different type of medium. This is tapestry. This is a really beautiful, long embroidered composition. There's actually a really cool video, if you go down here to this link, that, and I might show it in class, but it's kind of an animation of it. It's huge. It's if you roll this material out, I mean, it's about 231 feet across, and so this is known as the Bayeux Tapestry. It's about 231 feet of embroidery. It was sewn between 1070 and 1080, and there's speculation that certainly it was probably done by women at the School of Embroidery at Canterbury in Kent, England. And there's some other speculations too that, perhaps the men had done it as well. So what we're concerned with this though is its function, and also, again, looking and trying to sort of establish and recognize Romanesque stylistic conventions. The embroiderers of the Bayeux Tapestry worked with twisted wool dye in 8 colors. They used only 2 basic stitches. The piece was commissioned by Bishop Odo of Bayeux. He was the half-brother of William, Duke of Normandy, who conquered England in 1066. And so what this tapestry, it's really not a tapestry, it's an embroidery, is narrating his conquest. And so it includes both pictures and words in Latin. And it's really quite detailed and exquisite. So, think about another work that has a sort of narrative quality and talking about a historical event. Can you think of one from Rome? Perhaps the Column of Trajan. Remember that twisted column? So, like the Column of Trajan, it's a story that's both historical and a little bit biased. Obviously, this is meant to uphold William and, give him political authority about his brilliant conquest over England. The tapestry was designed to be hung around the choir of Odo's Bayeux Cathedral. And again, this is something that you should think about in terms of promoting propaganda on the part of the Normans. So again, in terms of function, again, art being used as propaganda and to establish political authority. This is an important work because it depicts a specific event and was completed shortly after it occurred. So this is, modern. This is, when this was made, this was a contemporary event that hadn't happened so long ago, as with other scenes that we might have looked at before. In the detail, we see Bishop Odo blessing the feast that takes place before the battle. So this is a scene right here. Elaborate textiles, including embroideries and tapestries, enhance a noble status, and were thus featured. So the function of tapestries and embroideries in general were that they helped keep castles warm, because obviously it was very cold. But it also was a status or a symbol of prestige as well. Just like with those Hiberno-Saxon from the early medieval period that we studied in our last subunit, the metal jewelry, the cloisonnade, the pins, and the purse covers, those were items of prestige as well. They were buried with their owners upon death, but how it sort of functioned in a similar way. So it's very detailed. If you really look closely, it tells us, the different types of weapons that they used during this battle, and the types of ships as well. So if you really look closely, there are different types of weapons, and the ships look different. Let me see if I have one of the ships. So it really gives us a sense of what tools they used back then, and what it really was like to live back then. So it's an important artifact in that regard. So again, here's an example of it, sort of hanging. It's hanging in a banquet hall of a church right now. But here are just different, like, look at the horses. Here are the ships. And again, it's showing how, they would cut down trees, to make ships, war and battle. Remember, soldiers had to not just be able to fight, but had to be good engineers. They had to be able to dig ditches. They had to be able to build ships and bridges and, things like that to survive. There's a close-up again. So I want you to look at this for a minute and see if you notice anything strange. Okay. So I want you to pay attention to this. So this is kind of an unusual object. And this is very historically specific. It's depicting Halley's Comet passing by. So it's very detailed in that regard. We see figures pointing at it. The Anglo-Saxons probably saw the comet as a portent or foretelling of the disaster of them being conquered. King Harold slumps on his throne. There he is right here. He's like, oh, this is a bad omen. This is not good news. And so he foresees the disaster that is about to come. And so again, it's really interesting. They're actually recording, they saw this as a mystical sign from God. But, here it is, this work of art, this religious work of art, depicting a scientific phenomenon. So it's very interesting from that point of view as well. All right. Well, that's the end of our Romanesque chapter, or subunit. We will, let's go back. We will begin discussing Gothic architecture and art in our next subunit. Thank you.